Hey everyone, it's Miss Jasinski. Sorry that I'm not in class today. I actually took the day off work to be an elections inspector in a precinct for today's general election. So you're going to do your thing in class. I'm going to do my thing to help our democracy work. And I will see everybody back in class when we're all together on Thursday or Friday at the end of this week. As always, feel free to reach out if you've got any questions over the next time while you're either working on this lesson or as you do your homework tonight. Email is always an easy way to get a hold of me, and you can always send me a remind message too. Just because I am working today, I'll have my cell phone on me, so it will be pretty easy for me to get a hold of you. If you do have any questions, I'd be happy to still try and help you. So what you're going to do for today's lesson is to work through this activity about an event in history called the Crusades. Even though the Crusades sounds like a single thing, it's actually this whole time period where we're going to talk about a lot of conflict and a lot of turmoil. The region of the world that we're going to focus in on right now, if we could have a big map, I'd be dialing in on it, is the Middle East. The Middle East is a fascinating place because it is this crossroads and this gateway in between the Western world and the Eastern world. If you look at where the Middle East is on the map, it is literally the center, kind of this bridge in between these two parts of the world. And historically and culturally, we're going to see a lot of significance about how that area developed. So before we get into all that, we got to talk a little bit about what these things were specifically and what was going on in the world at the time. So if we can pause for just a second right now, take a look at this question in front of you. I want you to think back to what we've been talking about over the last 2 weeks or so, and think about some of the major differences in between Eastern and Western Europe at this point in history. We left off talking about the Great Schism in 1054. So situated in this time period still, the 1050s, think about what some of those major differences were. So some of the things that you might be thinking about were these differences in language between these two regions. We're beginning to see major differences in religion. Even though most of Europe is Christian, we're seeing differences in practice. We're seeing a lot of cultural differences, right, between the East being successful and the West being kind of isolated and left behind. And then we also see a lot of political differences, that in the West, the whole world is kind of arranged into small warring kingdoms. And in the East, you still have this big empire structure left over from Rome with an emperor in charge. So what's going on in the rest of the world? We've been focusing in on this class a lot about Europe. And so for a second, we're going to take a step back and think about it. So even though we've focused a little bit on the Western world being in the Dark Ages, the rest of the world is actually really thriving at this point. Right around 1050, we see civilizations in Central America, places in Africa, in the Middle East, and then as far east as China, really thriving. They're beginning to trade with each other. Their economies are super successful, and people are experiencing their golden age. Western Europe is completely isolated from all of this, though. They don't have a way to interact with these other parts in the world, and they don't have many resources to trade. In your digital binders, there's a spot for you to follow along with these notes. From this slide, you should be filling out the very first blanks to remind yourself that civilizations in other places in the world were thriving while Eastern Europe was isolated. I want you to go ahead and pause my video right now and watch the I want you to go ahead and pause the video of my explaining this lesson in just a second. And you're gonna go ahead and play the video in the slides. It should play just this short clip from about minute 22 and a half to about minute 25. And so you're gonna go ahead and watch that within the slides, just that little section. and then go ahead and start my video recording back up when you've finished. So that video introduces us to a pretty important character at this point named Al-Hakim. Al-Hakim is an Islamic leader from the Middle East, and without much warning, he did something pretty serious to the Church of the Holy Sepulchre in the city of Jerusalem. So Al-Hakim and his forces set fire to the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. That, of course, sounds terrible, but we need to really put into context just how serious of a crime that would have been and how offensive that would have been to Christians at the time. In this next video, you're going to learn a little bit about what the Church of the Holy Sepulchre actually is. We mentioned it already in class, maybe about a week ago, but this is going to give you a short little tour of that actual holy place. Go ahead and pause me again in my instructions, and then watch the first minute and a half, minute and 45 seconds of this video about the Holy Sepulchre. So obviously now understanding the importance and the religious significance that the Church of the Holy Sepulchre had to Christians at this time, we can begin to see why Christian people were so upset and that there was this rift beginning to form between the two religions. About 30 years after the burning of the Church of the Holy Sepulchre in 1095, the Pope Urban II at the time, went on a speaking tour all throughout Western Europe to try and rally people together and unite his church. And as he traveled around, he gave this speech in which he told Christian people that he wanted them to travel to the Holy Land, to travel to Jerusalem, and fight the Muslim people to take this back. And at the end of his speech, he always ended it with the words, "God wills it." The point of this was that as the Pope, right, even though he was the mouthpiece for God on earth, he still was human. But he understood that if people felt like God was asking them directly to win back this land, to take back this Holy Land, that it would be really difficult for people to disagree with this. Like I said at the very beginning, even though we refer to the Crusades as an event, it really wasn't a single time. The Crusades refer to this entire nearly 200-year period where there was a ton of conflict over control of the city of Jerusalem. It continued on and off for those 200 years, and it was different crusades were called by 9 different popes throughout history. There was actually even a children's crusade at one point in 1096, where Pope Urban II asked people to send their children on these journeys. The idea was that the purity of the children that were sent would keep them safe and would make their cause to take back over Jerusalem even more just. We have to remember that travel at this time is really, really difficult. So a trip from Western Europe all the way to Jerusalem in what's now modern day Israel, right? It was just the Middle East region at this point in history, would have taken an incredible amount of time. On average, crusaders traveled for 70 days before even reaching their location, and then fought, and then needed to make it home. So this was a huge endeavor that the popes were asking people to take on. Again, just like before, we'll get this going a little bit smoother. There's the minute marks down at the bottom if you need to reference them, but the video should start and stop exactly where you need it to. Go ahead and pause my instructions and watch the next couple minutes of this video. So, how did Christian crusaders protect the land that they had just conquered from Muslim forces? Hopefully you remember from the video clip that you just watched, one of the ways that they protected this land was by building massive crusader castles all along the borders of this new territory. The idea was that they had fought very, very hard to protect it, and that land now belonged to them and needed to belong to them for a very long time. So, why were people willing to go on these trips? People from all different walks of life ended up joining the Crusades. There were people who were rich, there were merchants, there were knights, there were professionally trained soldiers, there was farmers. Everybody from noble people down to peasants were willing to upend their lives as they knew it and take off on these crusades when the Pope asked them to. And there's a couple different things that motivated them to do this. The main thing was religious obligation, right? Remember that speech, God wills it. If your Pope is telling you that and you believe in the holiness of the Pope, that alone would be enough motivation for you to take off and listen to his words. In addition to this obligation, there was also the promise of indulgences. Indulgences are an official forgiveness from the church for any sins that you've committed. If you're forgiven of all your sins, you automatically get into heaven when you die. So this promise of an automatic ticket to heaven if you went and fought in the Crusades was pretty appealing to people. We also have to put ourselves into the shoes of people living in Western Europe at this time. Remember, there's three major threats that they're constantly facing: starvation and lack of resources, constant disease, and constant invasion from other places. Thinking about taking an exciting, adventurous trip to a place that nobody you knew had ever been before was pretty promising. There also was the potential of economic gain. There were resources, there were goods, there were things in the Middle East that they had never had access to before. And it was creating whole new kinds of markets as people returned from these crusades and learned about new places. Take a second to think about which of these four things would have been most convincing to you. There's also a spot on your note sheet in your digital binder to record these reasons. Anytime we talk about some kind of conflict or some kind of battle, the natural question is, well, who won? Control of the city of Jerusalem exchanged hands between Christian and Muslim leadership for nearly 200 years. There was never an official winner or loser of these battles. If you asked Christian people at the time, the entire crusading time period was over in 1291, when they finally lost control of the city of Jerusalem in a battle called the Siege of Acre. If you were to ask Muslim people at the time, they would have said that really those crusades weren't over until well into the 15th century, because Christian forces continued to invade both Jerusalem and Constantinople, challenging their control of both of those cities. So now we're going to do a little bit of work with some primary sources. In your digital binders, you've got three short excerpts labeled Document A, Document B, and Document C. We're going to focus on just Document A and Document B right now. For each of them, I want you to read the context up at the top. I want you to find and highlight the source of that text in yellow. For Document A, I want you to highlight in green any words or phrases that give you clues that this author was a Christian crusader. In Document B, I want you to highlight in blue any words or phrases that give us clues that this author was from a Muslim perspective or was an Islamic person. Go ahead and pause my directions right now to give yourself some time to read both of these documents and do the proper highlighting. After you've had some time to read over documents A and B, I want you to now move on to document C in your digital notebook. There's something different about the source because it is missing both a context and a source. Your job is to read through this and highlight anything in pink that you think gives you a clue about who could have written it, what perspective it came from, or what point of view it came from. I want you to try and find anything in that reading that would give you a clue that this document is more like document A or more like document B. Go ahead and pause my instructions now and read document C. Hopefully you noticed some of the things in document C that made it more like document A. This in fact was from a Christian author who participated in the very first crusade called by Pope Urban II. Some of those things about identifying the people in Jerusalem as enemies would have maybe given you some clues. There were also very similar descriptions of the battle and the amount of blood of the enemies and the way that those battles were fought. And they're describing that same battle, that same very first siege of Jerusalem. This next part, you're going to be working on a mapping activity. All you need to do for this is to click on the map that's hyperlinked in the document in front of you. It's going to take you to an outside source that looks like this. This map is completely ready to go, and you're going to work through each of the step-by-step instructions in these slides. Anytime there's a purple arrow, that is something those are instructions you need to follow to navigate the map. Anytime there's a blue question mark, that's a time where you need to pause and answer that question in your digital binder. There's 2 pages in your digital binder that look kind of like blue stained glass in the back. And those are the ones that are going to walk you through this document. There's pictures over here to help you find some of the things that this GeoInquiry is pointing out. You can see again, the purple arrows are going to give you instructions, and the blue question marks are going to give you questions about what you're looking at. One little tip about how to navigate this map, I would highly suggest that you use these plus and minus buttons over on the left-hand side to zoom in and zoom out. The trackpads on your laptops are very sensitive, and it makes the zoom in very, very fast. And it's probably going to give you a little bit of motion sickness if you try and move around it that way. So as you can see, right, you're either too close or too far away. You can always click the home button to resituate yourself on just this map. You can go ahead and turn off these instructions completely because I don't need to walk you through every single step of this. Again, go ahead and shoot me an email or send me a text if you've got any questions at all about what you should be covering. Everything should be pretty self-explanatory for this third and final part of today's activity, though, about the Crusades. Good luck and have fun.